in order to understand the book of Haggai, we need to understand three things: the history, and also the book of Ezra, and also some stuff about the temple. So that's what we're going to look at. First, the history. Okay. Now, you have some random shapes in the top chart of your paper. If you see those shapes, that's what we're going to fill in as we go through this PowerPoint. So, for those who like dates, I'm going to put them at the bottom. For those who don't, just ignore the dates because it doesn't matter. But there's the dates if you're interested. You don't have to write those down. Okay, so the history of the people of Israel starts with what man? Abraham. Okay, well, yeah, the history, the writing down of it would be Moses. But Moses wrote about Abraham. So he was the father of the Jewish people and other peoples. And he had a son, and he had a son, and he had a great-grandson named Joseph who went where?
To Egypt.
He was sold as a slave to Egypt, and through a series of events, he became the prime minister, and all his family came down, and then things were good for them for a while, but pretty soon they were enslaved in Egypt as a people. So they were in slavery in Egypt for, can you guess how long? Roughly that Egypt period lasted.
70 years.
If you do the math on the dates at the bottom, you can figure it out.
400 years.
400 years, that's right. Those dates are approximate. And then who led them out of Egypt? Moses did. So typically it's transition periods where most of the books of the Bible are written. So Moses led them out of slavery, and then he leads them right up to the land, and Joshua leads them in. And when they're in that land, what form of government do they have?
Yeah.
It's a tribal confederacy. It's not a nation exactly, the way we would think of it. So what kind of leaders did they have?
Judges.
Yes, they had judges. Moses would be the first judge. And how long do you think that period of time lasted while they were under judges?
400.
Yes, another 400-year period. And who was the last judge who anointed the first king?
Samuel.
Yes, Samuel's an important transitional figure. The last judge, he anoints the first king, and then actually he anoints the second king also, because the first king goes crazy. Literally goes insane. Okay. And then, so they're still in the land, but they have a new form of government, and it is, as we said, it is kings. So why do you think the king's time period, which also coincidentally lasts 400 years, why do you think I shaped that like a wishbone thing instead of a box?
Because it was divided.
Yes. After 120 years, you had Saul for 40, David for 40, Solomon for 40. And then after Solomon, when his son is a fool, splits the kingdom into north and south. And what do we call the northern half and the southern half?
Israel.
Which one's Israel?
Northern.
The northern one is Israel and the southern one is Judah. Because that's primarily the only tribe that the line of David has. Really Judah and Benjamin and technically Simeon. But yeah. Okay. So if you notice which kingdom ends first, based on the chart.
Israel.
Yeah, it ends. That's why it's shorter. And how does the nation of Israel end? The northern kingdom.
They're dispersed.
Who ends it? I should say.
They were taken over. Was it the Assyrians?
It was the Assyrians. Yes, Assyria is the big bad world power at the time, and at some points they even take over Egypt. Assyria off and on with Egypt owning it and whatnot. But yeah, they eventually take over Israel. The capital city was Samaria at that time, and they take it over. And then a new power comes into play that takes over Assyria and ends the southern kingdom, Judah. Does anybody know who that is? Who takes over the southern kingdom of Judah? Because it ends too, as you can see. Yes, Babylon conquers Assyria. Over in Mesopotamia, those little kingdoms over there were always vying for power to control this big empire. And Babylon takes over that, and so that leads, the line of David and the people of Judah, the ones who actually, some of them still follow the Lord. And many refugees from Israel too were there. And that leads them into exile. So that's the red box. Now on my chart, I have the exile lasting 100 years. A lot of people say the exile lasted how long?
70 years.
70 years. Yeah. It's there's several stages of them being captured. First they just take the rich, then they come back and anyway, it's not exactly like a hard break and a hard comeback. There's several stages of being taken over and several stages of coming back. So we're going to find out where the exact 70-year thing comes into play later. But yeah, so roughly 100 years. You could call it shorter, you could call it longer, depending on how you do the calculations. And then Babylon is taken over by another nation. Anybody know?
The Medo-Persian.
Yeah, Persians. Yeah, and technically it's a combined kingdom of Media and Persia. There's a man who, I think a Median king marries a Persian princess, and so their child is really the heir of both kingdoms. That'd be Cyrus the Great, and who happened to be a spectacular leader. So he lets them go back, the Jewish people, and actually all the little peoples that he's taken over. And it was a nice thing for an emperor to do, to not just conquer a people, but to uproot them and take them to another place and put other people in their place. Can anyone think what the advantage is for an emperor? Like if an emperor means he owns lots of other countries too, not just his own. Why would you I took over this place, I think I'm going to take the people and switch them. What good would that do him?
They support him.
They support him?
I mean, the ones they bring in. No?
Oh, well, okay.
No, he's already conquered them.
Yeah, he's already conquered them, but yeah, okay, so it does help with conscription to his army, that's true. But if you are uprooted to a new place, especially in a time and a culture where nobody moves, you stay as far back as you can know. Your ancestors have always been in this town, and suddenly you're uprooted. Well, guess what? You have a new diet now. You have a new water supply. You don't know how the rain works. You don't know when to plant. There's all these new things. You're sick. When you first get there, you're getting sick. Your crops are failing because you're like, there's 2 rainy seasons in this place. I didn't know that. I just always assumed every place was like my place. So you're learning all these new things. You're just dealing with life. You don't have time to raise a rebellion.
Oh, so he did it so that no one could rebel against him.
Yes, that's why he did it.
So it made him more submissive, or
It made him more submissive. Also, if you are in your old town, who's seen Red Dawn? Anybody? Either the old one or the new one? No. Movie reference isn't working. So it's a movie about America being taken over. The new one is North Korea. The old one was Russia. But anyway, America's taken over, and some like, teenagers, like 18-year-old guys are like, we're gonna fight against these communists, and they fight back and they eventually win back our country. That's all it's an exciting movie, right? But if those same people had been, instead of just conquered, had been taken to Russia to live there in some town in Russia, what are they going to do? Are they going to somehow get back to America to take it over again? They're just, so you see why leaving them in the land is a recipe for them rebelling against you. So that's why they would do that. So then the king of Persia comes along, and he gives all the same benefits by sending them back, but they all love him for it. He's letting us go back, that's so great. But now we're dealing with life again. We're just refugees, trying to rebuild our homes and stuff. So, Persia lasts longer because they're much nicer to the people. They leave them alone, basically. Okay, so Persia lets them come back. So what's that dotted time period, the other 100-year time period that's in dotted black lines on your chart?
400.
Well, it lasts, up until the year 400. So it lasts, remember in BC you're counting down. So it lasts from 500 to 400, so it's about roughly 100 years, give or take, a century. Well, what do we call it? It's the time period after the exile. Very easy name. It's called the Post Exile. Not a very creative name, but that's what they call it. We give it a name because a lot was going on and books of the Bible were being written. And you call them, some prophets are exilic prophets, meaning they were during the exile. Some are post-exilic prophets. So you have books of the Bible being written during that time, like Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai. You have even one book of the Bible about people who didn't come back but stayed in Persia. What book is that? People who stayed in Persia, Jewish people, ended up marrying the Persian king. Esther. Esther and Mordecai, they stay there. Okay, so so during the exile, Kings was written. Why would the Book of Kings be written during the exile? What good would it do those people? Anybody ever read Kings? The Book of Kings, First and 2nd Kings. You remember them saying, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and worshiped the Baals. Remember that line? All these kings. So Kings is written basically to say, guess why we're here, people? Look what we did. Okay? And then during the post-exile, 1st and 2nd Chronicles are written. Same information. If you've ever read, you finish 2nd Kings, and you're like, okay, what's next? And you get the Chronicles, and this is the same stuff. But it's written again to say, and from a different point of view, yes, we blew it, but guess what? God was faithful. We're back in the land now. He's giving us a second chance now. So all the information is written through a different lens. Things are a lot more positive in Chronicles than they are in Kings, even though it's the same information. Okay, so that's basically the history, then 400 years of no books of the Bible being written until we get to the New Testament. Okay, now, if you were lost on all of that, or you have a question about that, you should ask it now. Confused about the chart? Yes, Ruth.
Okay, under post-exile, is that when Kings and Chronicles was written, or back?
During the exile, 1st and 2nd Kings were written.
Okay.
During the post-exile, 1st and 2nd Chronicles.
Okay.
Yes. Other books, of course. And really, this whole time period right here, centering around leading up to the exile itself, coming back, or even staying, that's when all the prophets are written. So that's this class called Old Testament prophets. It really centers around this big event. You can imagine Okay, what was the biggest event in American history?
Revolution.
Well, okay, but that started our country, the Revolutionary War. But since then, it was the Civil War.
Civil rights.
That's the biggest thing that happened in this country, is that we almost got ripped in half. COVID was big, killed a lot of people, but the Civil War killed a lot more people. Okay. So, now, imagine if America was taken over and all the people were deported to Russia or somewhere. That would be a bigger event. It would be devastating. You would teach your children, it was so good in America. We had this thing called Christmas. We had freedom. We had capitalism, not communism.
We have lots of statues.
We had statues. We had great stuff. Don't forget, you're an American. And if your kids wanted to marry somebody in that other country, you'd be like, no. Don't marry a communist. Marry another American. That's what happened to the Jewish people. And some of them did just intermarry and assimilate. But some, when they got the opportunity, they did come back. So, okay. So that was the history. I hope you got that. Now we need to talk about the Book of Ezra. Because Haggai is like a little minor character in the Book of Ezra. He's included in there. So let's look at the Book of Ezra to get a little more detail. Okay. So here's the chart. We're going to zoom in on this section of the chart. And if you notice, okay, so I'm zooming in on that part that I've highlighted in red. Here it is. Here's the zoom in. You've got that chart down below in a different color as your second chart. You see how that's a zoom in? I've just got the tail end of the kingdom. And then the exile and the post exile. Do you see that? Just a magnification. Okay, so when Judah ended with their capital of Jerusalem, the temple was destroyed. First it ended and they said, look, you can keep your stuff as long as you submit to us, but they kept rebelling. Finally they came in and just destroyed everything. The temple was utterly destroyed. Who had built that temple? Anybody know? Solomon, yeah. So that temple was destroyed and the people were brought into exile. Then when Cyrus says you can go back, they come back in 3 waves. After the exile's over, the people come back in 3 waves under 3 different leaders. The first leader's name is Zerubbabel. Leads a group back. You can just put a Z there for that if you want. We are in the Post Exile box. Oh, I think I have a Z on your chart.
Yeah, you got a Z there.
Okay, so good. So that's a wave of people coming back. Then the next leader is Ezra. He brings a bunch of people back. He was instrumental. He was a really big deal for the composition of the Old Testament. Most likely he's the one who put Psalms together. Took all the different Psalms that have been written by David and others and compiled them into a book.
Who did that?
Ezra, we think. We don't know for sure.
Okay.
But there's good reason for thinking so. Okay, and then the last wave, it's a book of the Bible. Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Is that Nehemiah?
It is Nehemiah. The way you can remember the order is with the acronym Zen. Okay? We don't believe in Zen Buddhism, but it can help you remember the order of the 3 waves. As the people returned. Now, these 2 waves under Zerubbabel and Ezra are in the same book, the Book of Ezra. Nehemiah has his own book. Okay, so we're going to look at that Book of Ezra. We're still on the history of Ezra. So here's a few verses in the Book of Ezra. Could I get someone to read these nice and loud for me? Any volunteers? Let's see. Donna, do you want to read what's on the screen there? You can turn there, or the verse will be on the screen too. Whichever way is easier for you.
Ezra chapter 3, verse 8. All who had returned from the captivity to Jerusalem began to work, working on the house of God.
Okay. So what happened there? The verses that are on the screen, she just read the first paragraph on
They
the screen.
began to work. You asked what happened there?
Yeah, just these verses are not in your notes, I'm sorry.
They began working on the house of God.
Yeah, they came back and they started building the temple. Yes, the house of God. Good. Donna, next paragraph.
When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priest sang to the Lord. He is good, his love toward Israel endures forever.
Okay, so what happened there?
They were recognizing the Lord.
Okay, good. They laid the foundation.
They were joyful.
Yeah, did they finish it? The temple?
Not
No,
at that
they just
point.
laid the foundation, but they were excited. Hey, we're back. We're building the temple again. We got the foundation laid. That's the hardest part. And they sing praise to the Lord. And the last paragraph, Donna.
And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid.
They gave a great shout. Okay, that should be a wonderful ending to chapter 3, but it goes on. I remember as like a 14-year-old reading this book and just being astounded by this next couple verses. Here it is. Oh, Donna, sorry. Verse 12.
But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy.
Okay, it says wept aloud. Nobody cried silently in ancient times. You know, a lot in modern times, someone cries and a tear rolls down their face. It was wailing. That's just how they cried. I really wish our culture did that, because it is a better, what do you call that when you,
Expression.
yeah, you like get it out,
Yeah.
and we can't. And so that's part of why our grief is so complex. We are unable to get it out. At least I am, and many people that I know are that way. Okay, so they're weeping. The old people and the young people are yay. It's mixed together. Why were some people weeping?
Because they remembered a formal temple.
Yes. So that means we're done with Ezra, we need to look at the temple, learn some stuff about the temple. So, sorry to say, but we're back to the timeline. I know some people hate timelines. It's just part of it. Okay, if you love God's word, you gotta learn the timelines. That's just the way it is. Or much of it won't make sense. Okay, so where on the top timeline would you put the building of Solomon's temple? You
By the
find that?
cross?
Judah or Israel?
It was actually, okay, Judah and Israel is very close, but it was built before they split, because it was Solomon's son Rehoboam who, his bad policy, split the nation.
Okay, so would that be in Kings then?
Yes, in Kings, right where sometime when the monarchy was united. Okay, there's only 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, that were in that little short united section. So Solomon's temple is built there. And what do you know about Solomon's temple? Anybody know anything about Solomon's temple?
Very grand.
It was very grand. This is not what it looked like. This is just like a child's drawing of it. But it was really nice. There was a lot of gold. Okay, anyone want to take a guess as to the gold that Solomon put in the temple and on the temple, how much that would be worth today? Not that, just that amount, if you just weighed it out.
Wow.
Anyone want to guess? Just guess. How much?
Billions.
$950 million.
Ooh.
Okay? The way you know that's a big number is that if it's $1 million less, it doesn't really make any difference. Right?
Right.
949 million is basically the same number. Okay. Yes, it was very grand. It was amazing. It was, even just his throne alone, there was nothing like it in any kingdom. It was like the greatest temple in the world. And we don't have time to get into that. Okay, but then it's destroyed because they keep worshiping other gods. They're sent into exile. And they come back and they build the second temple under Ezra and Zerubbabel and Haggai. and they lay the foundation. And they're like, oh, wow, it's not as good. Those who remember. So the older people. So,
But the
again,
Lord says that he was gonna make that better than the old one.
well, we'll get to that. We haven't actually reached Haggai yet.
Okay.
This is all background information so that we can understand Haggai. But what you're referencing is very important. But just to get a cultural frame of reference so that we can understand the way that people felt, imagine, again, with the takeover of America, you have seen the Capitol building, suppose. Welcome.
Sorry, here's a set of notes.
You see it, or wherever, doesn't matter.
So, raise your hand if you've seen the Capitol building. Okay. If you haven't, well, there's a picture of it. So it's very nice, very well-maintained lawn. You know, just a very nice building. Now imagine America's taken over and our Capitol building is just reduced to a big pile of rubble. Okay? All right? So, but you can remember this. Then, a generation later, Americans come back after being, slaves in Russia or somewhere. We come back and we're looking and we're like, man, we got to rebuild this. We're a nation again. We're back in our land. America's going to rise again. Now, it's just a bunch of refugees, right? We're just back. We're poor. We just barely scrape together enough money to get on a boat over here. We get back to our land. We go back, and it's just imagine just like those of us in the room and 100 other random people. We're all like, so who knows much about building? Let's start clearing away this rubble and start building, and we clear it away. We build it. We say, well, this is just going to have to be starting a new government. This is going to have to be our government building. Here it is. Yes. Got it. We have a place for our leader to write the laws. It looks really nice and neat. It wasn't. Now, the young people would be excited. They don't remember anything about America. They're just back. They're starting anew, afresh, because they're remembering this. When we got here, man, it looked like this. A pile of rubble. And now, we actually have something. We actually have our own government. Maybe it's not great, but it's like, we got it. So the young people are excited. The old people are remembering this. And they're like,
Yeah.
this is never, and they're looking at this and they're like, this is our nation. America's never going to be the same. That's how they feel. That's why you get the mix, some people weeping and some people shouting for joy. Okay? So that is the background information we need for the book of Haggai. But just bear in mind, right now, all they have is the foundation. So this is what they have, something like this. I don't think they used rebar back then, but you get the idea. It's just the foundation. Okay, it looks like it's a footer foundation. But anyway, up north we have basements. We don't have no basements. Just a footer. Okay. No, here are slabs actually, but that's not important. What is important is this last bit from Ezra chapter 6. Okay, there's the timeline in the middle. Donnie, you're doing so good. Could you read verse 14 of chapter 6 on the screen?
So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet.
Okay. So Haggai's now involved. I wonder why Haggai got involved. And then if you could, I omitted some text. That's why I have that little ... And then read that phrase at the bottom.
They finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel.
Okay, now what I omitted was in the 7th year of King Darius, that kind of stuff. But if you really do the math, you realize something's funny about they're building it and then it gets finished. Something's funny about the time span. So we have to look at that a little more closely. We're down on your bottom chart again. We're going to fill in those boxes. So, it was the year 586 BC. I bet you're glad you know that. That means a lot to you, 586. But anyway, the temple was destroyed. Okay? So you can, in that first box, you can write temple destroyed. And then, in 538, the temple rebuilding begins. So if any math whizzes out there can figure that out, that's something around 50 years. 48 years. After 48 years. So you'd have to be, to actually remember the temple, you'd have to be at least like 51, early 50s to remember it. They start rebuilding it. And then in 520, Haggai comes along. Okay? And Haggai is involved in the rebuilding of the temple. And then in 516, the temple's finished. So, any math whiz can do, how long was the temple gone from 586 to 516?
7 years.
That is where you get your exact 70 years, according to the prophecy by Jeremiah. So you see that little green thing, and that's our 70-year span. But the question is, what was going on during these 18 years? You see that? Between the start and when Haggai gets there? It should have only taken 4 years to build it. So what were they doing for those 18 years?
Didn't they just kind of?
They were building their own homes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They just.
They got busy with their own
walked away.
stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's why Haggai has to come along and say, hey, let's do this. Let's actually do it. Okay. So now we understand all that information. Hopefully you understand it. And now we can understand the book of Haggai. Any questions about any of that? There's a lot. Okay. Book of Haggai. Donna, you want to read? I think, yeah, if you turn the page, you should have this section, should be mostly highlighted, but it's on the screen with some nice color-coded stuff. So Don, can you read it for us?
Just the highlighted or all of it?
Everything on the screen.
This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you to yourselves be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin?
So, God, so Haggai says that God says that the people say, it's not time. We don't know why. Maybe they were using an excuse like, well, technically, Jeremiah said 70 years, so we shouldn't do it yet. Using the Bible to not have to do what God wants. We don't know why, but we certainly know that they built their own houses. Real nice. I know paneling's not in style anymore here. Just imagine like 40 years ago when paneling was all the rage.
Yeah.
Remember that? Okay? That's wasn't the same type of paneling, but that was what was cool at the time, or nice. And is it time for you to be living in nice houses while my house is a ruin? That is what Haggai's about. Now let's look at our notes. So we just went through the first two highlighted sections. Okay. Now remember, they're refugees. They come back with, nothing. They need a place to live. They got, a whole new, you have to plant crops. It's a whole new life now. So you can see why they got busy with other things, but that's the perennial human problem is we get busy with our own lives and we neglect God. Let's see, let's just for a moment skim down to verse 9, what's highlighted there. Because my house which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. We get busy. What did Jesus say in the parable of the sower? What chokes the word? What are the thorns that choke the word out of someone? What do those represent?
Loss of salvation.
No. That's not what he says. In the parable of the sower, he says they grow up, they have root, but
No foundation.
the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desire for other things choke the word out of us, make us unfruitful.
Oh.
The cares of this life. And it's really easy to say, well, I'd love to help you. I know that person is lonely and needs a visit, but my car just broke down. So I'm going to have to get that whole thing straightened out. I was on the phone for an hour with insurance because I'm not going to pay for it myself, that's for sure. Wasn't my fault. And we spend all this time on our own lives. If you were to line up the percentage, I'm not saying everyone in here is guilty of this. I'm just saying I am and many of us are. But if you were to add up the time of what percent of your life do you spend on your own stuff? What percent on God's stuff? If you really add up the time, it's very convicting. Deceitfulness of wealth. We're going to see some of this deceitfulness. Okay. Who else? Ruth, would you like to read a little passage there? How about starting in verse 5, the highlighted section? We're in Haggai now. It's highlighted yellow in your notes. I think yellow is easier to read than green.
Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. Is that all you want me to read?
Yes, thank you. So, God says, give careful thought to your ways. Why does he say that? He's just saying, watch out, watch where you go.
Because they're focusing too much on themselves.
Yes, that's correct. That's why. But he says, think carefully about what is happening in your life.
They're not getting
plant.
fed. They're planting and not harvesting.
They're planting a lot, but they're harvesting little.
Yeah.
Think about that. You get money and you put it into a purse with holes. Anybody experience that? See, I deposit my paycheck into my account, and my wife and I both have a card to spend out of the account. And I have a little app on my phone where I can watch, like during the day, I'm like, what did she buy at Target for? Oh my, and then she stopped at Aldi and Aldi's a discount store, how did she spend it? And I'm just watching throughout the day, it's just hanging out. I'm just putting it in.
Hear what Michael said.
Welcome to marriage, yes. But you've experienced that, the idea, especially, in the days where there was no budgeting classes. It was actually literally a bag full of like heavy coins. And you're like, where did it all go? And I can actually figure out where it all went. By checking all the receipts that are sent to my phone. But back then, when you're dealing in only cash, sometimes you're like, where did it all go? So that's what God is saying. Think carefully about what's happening. You're planting a lot, but you're not harvesting much. You're eating, but you're not filled. You're getting a lot of money, but where's it going? Now, why does God want them to think about that? Why does he want them to think?
Because he wants better for you.
Yeah, he says, think about it. It must mean something. It must mean what? They're focusing on
Material.
taking care of themselves, but it's not working because God's not blessing it.
Because they left God out of it.
God's actually against them.
It's not enough.
Yeah. So nothing's working. They're not getting, but they're working, so they work harder, they spend more time on it. I think that's not the answer. Okay. Let's see. Monica, could you read the next sections, starting in 9b? It's highlighted in your notes?
9b,
Yeah.
because of my house which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house.
Keep going.
Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew and the earth its crops. I call for a drought.
Yeah, I call it nothing. That's why it's not working. Because you're focused on yourselves and not on me. You're putting yourselves first, so you know what I did? I just turned off the sky. Okay, so Haggai comes along and says, hey, there's a problem here. This is all the book of Haggai. And then, let's see here. Debbie, could you read verse 12? It's highlighted there.
Can you say the name?
Zerubbabel.
Then Zerubbabel, son of
Shealtiel.
Shealtiel, Joshua, son of
Jozadak.
Jozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai. Did you want me to keep going?
No, that's it. So, remember the ZEN? You know, Zerubbabel, Ezra, still there. Joshua's a high priest at the time. Haggai's there. The people obey. And they do it. They listen to what Haggai says. Let's see. Marty, could you read verse 13 that's highlighted there?
Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord.
Because they started to obey.
They started to obey. It's a very simple message, right? I'm with you. But that is a key theme in this book. So just remember, what God says, the way he encourages them, you know, when I'm like, okay, you did the right thing, good job, here's a piece of candy or something like that. To encourage my kids if they're doing what's right. God says, here's your encouragement, I'm with you. I was against you before, now I'm with you. Okay. Chapter 2, next page. Sharon, could you read the highlighted section 3 through 5?
Who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? How does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? But now be strong, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, Joshua, son of Jozadak,
Yeah.
the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord, and work. For I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear.
So he's saying, yes, I know, those of you who remember Solomon's house, Solomon's temple, this seems like nothing. But I'm with you. Work. So he repeats that again. And then verse 5 is a little bit odd. This is what I covet. He said, I'm with you. That's what I coveted. That's what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt. It's Mount Sinai. What was the covenant all about? You obey me, and I'll be your God. I'll be with you. I will live right among you. When it first started, God was up on the mountaintop, and the people were down here in their camp, and they sent Moses up. But Moses came back and said, guess what God said? We all live in our tents. He's going to live in his tent, right here in the middle. He arranged all the tribes all around him. He's going to be with us. He's going to live with us. So that's the covenant. He's going to be with us. And yes, my spirit remains among you. I still have the covenant with you.
Maybe I'm getting off track here, but where is the Ark of the Covenant?
Now,
Yeah.
well, the important thing is where is God's presence that used to be in the Ark of the Covenant. And there is a Indiana Jones found it.
Yeah.
No, but God. So the reason the Ark was important is because God's presence was there.
Or God.
Yeah. Yes. So God's presence was there, and the book of Ezekiel describes when the Babylonians are coming. Ezekiel sees God's presence, leave the ark, go to the doorway of the temple, leave it, go to the doorway of the city, and then gone. So Ezekiel, you see God's presence going. After that, the ark is just a piece of wood and gold. So, probably the Babylonians got it and melted it down for something. But Hollywood wants to make it more exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. We are on verse 8. Penny.
The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says the Lord Almighty.
This is what you were talking about earlier. Why will the glory of this second temple be greater than the glory of Solomon's temple?
Because Jesus will be in it.
Because of the hearts of the people who are going to be right with the Lord, maybe.
The hearts of the people are going to be right with the Lord. Well, there were times off and on when the hearts of the people were right with the Lord in the first temple. So what he's saying here is the physical size and grandeur doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is God's presence. When God's presence left, that's what one thing that Ezekiel was about. Guess what? I'm with you. That's why that's such a significant thing. I'm back. I'm among you.
Because it was built back up.
Because God came back. If they'd have just built the temple, that doesn't mean anything. But if they build it at God's command and then he comes to live there again, that means something very significant. And God shows up again 400 years later to a priest named Zechariah. Remember that? Well, not God specifically, but Gabriel does. It says, John's coming.
Verses 6, 7, and 8 there, I always look at them as being the millennium they were referring to. If you read 6 and 7, I will shake all nations, which is our by night shall come, and I will fill this house with glory.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot written about those verses and different viewpoints. Yeah, very well could be the millennium. Some people want to say the desire of all nations is Jesus coming to it. From context, it seems more like it's all the wealth that'll stream there when it is the capital of the world. Because that's why he goes right into the silver is mine, the gold is mine. Everything belongs to me.
Yeah.
That stuff that Solomon put on there, that doesn't matter. It's about who lives there.
Well, he did also promise peace.
Yes. And in this place I will grant peace. Well, that hasn't been a lot.
It looks good.
There hasn't been a lot of peace there so
So is that kind of like the
there
peace
was-
that surpasses understanding that he's talking about, or what kind of peace is that?
Well, okay, there was peace for a little while. I want to say, well, let's see what the chart says about Persia. How long did the Persian kingdom last? It doesn't say on this chart in the notes, but maybe 200 years, something like that. I think it would be until the year 333 when Alexander the Great took over. So, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to do some mental math real quick. A couple centuries. There was a couple centuries of peace there. But then war hit again, and war hit again, and then the Maccabees, and war hit again, and then the Romans, and war hit again. I mean, every generation, war, all the way up until shortly after Jesus died, 40 years after Jesus' death, Romans came again. And 70 AD was a big deal. Judea was conquered, and the Jews were dispersed from the land. Until, that was 70 AD, while Paul was doing his thing. And the Jews were gone from the land until 1948. 47, 48. The war and the ending of the war. So, and there's not peace there now. They don't even own the Temple Mount. Muslims have a mosque there right now. So, it's possible that it's one of those, okay, we get a little bit of peace now, but there's going to be an ultimate peace someday. And we're still waiting for that. So yes, as far as the shaking of all nations, I do think that refers to the second coming, when Jesus does come back and shakes all nations. Okay, but the big deal is that God's among them. All right, we are going to skip the whole Zerubbabel thing. Zerubbabel is the Lord's signet ring. I think it has something to do with the curse of Jeconiah. What happened was when the line of David ended at the exile, the descendants of David were cursed, and this is a reinstatement of that line, I think. I need to study it more, but that's okay, because what we really want to come away with is one big idea of Haggai. So, before everyone writes down the sentence, what do you think? We'll take several, and then we as a class will put together, come up with it ourselves, and put together exactly what I typed up on my notes.
It's motivational.
Okay, yeah, it was motivational. Good.
He was a messenger.
Yes. So what was the message? Motivational. What was the motivational message?
Talk to the people to build the temple.
Yeah. Build the temple.
Quit worrying about what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
All that.
Just
Get to the temple.
get off your rear and build the temple.
That's right. Well,
Make God a priority.
Yes. Okay, so the big message, we're going to come to that in one second. The big message is, and I quote, get off your rear and build the temple.
Didn't I write that in that line?
That's what you write in the line. Now, my Hebrew professor didn't use the word rear, he used the word duff. I don't really know what duff means. I
It's an
assume
old
it.
word.
What?
It's an old word.
It's an old word.
Same as rear.
Okay,
Same as rear.
that's what I assumed. That's why I changed it.
He kept telling him to be strong, too.
Yes. So that's the big, big thing. Do it. Build it. Okay. So then in the second line there with the blanks, I'll give you time to finish the first one. It's not about how nice it is. It's about who lives there. Those are those blanks. It's not about how nice it is, it's about who lives there. Never confuse form with substance. Back when I had hair, I tried to make my hair a walking example of that. Don't confuse form with substance. Another way to say it is, you want the gas, not the wax. Right? The wax looks nice, but the gas is going to get you there. So that's what it's about. And yes, Kathy, I forget exactly what you said. There was something about
priorities.
Yeah. Stop worrying about your stuff. Stop worrying, well, I wanted a temple that was really pretty. And stop worrying about any of that. All that matters is that God's there and we do what He says. And He says to build it, so we're going to build it. So people start it. 18 years go by of them not working on it. And then Haggai shows up and says, let's get it done. And they do. And that's the same temple that Herod later renovates, and Jesus is in, and there's still a little bit of it left. Part of Herod's renovation, the Western Wall. Anybody seen it?
Is that the Wailing?
Wailing Wall, yeah.
No.
The last little bit of that temple is still there. Yeah, I saw it during Passover week one time. There was Jews from all over the world there.